Morning, everybody.
Morning.
We have a lot to go through here today.
Good morning.
Well, I'm sure we're going to have a lot more coming on here, so I'm going to give it a moment to get started. In the meantime, I want to introduce our distinguished leadership team that have helped me navigate through this. We have Fran Blakely. We have Elizabeth Rodriguez Hernandez, Colleen Stabinski. I don't know if Deborah Gibes is on. Deborah on yet? Colleen or Elizabeth?
I don't see her yet. Hello, everybody.
Good morning, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth or Foz, can you text Deborah and see if she can join, because she has a lot to contribute if she's available. We've got a tremendous amount to go through. I see Brian there from Cornerstone First. So, Brian, if you want to just talk like 30 seconds to a minute about what's happened the past week with financing. I know I'm maybe putting you on the spot, and I'm going to try to figure out the host controls here, which are not giving me control to mute people. So give me a second.
Yeah, sure.
So just share with us what's going on with financing. I mean, with mortgage rates, if you can. Thank you.
Well, the roller coaster ride seems to be on the downward trend, which is good. This past week, rates improved. Once again, the financial markets anticipate the Fed will cut rates. That's coming up soon. They have a meeting on July 30th and 31st. There's no indication that they're going to cut rates, but they do. The market is baking in this anticipation of the Fed cutting rates in September. You know, the financial, the housing, the mortgage industries, the Fed, they're putting pressure on the Fed to cut rates. These calls have grown louder. This is due to softening economic data, unemployment numbers, back-to-back low inflation readings. The Fed funds futures, which is what shows it's pricing in a 98% probability of a Fed rate cut in September. So that's what's good. There's a lot of Fed officials that's saying, yeah, we're not there yet. Inflation, our goal of 2% inflation is not there yet. So there's global pressure that's mounting too. So this is not just a US thing. There's central banks, leaders around the globe. Typically different economies will cut and hike together. This prevents distorted currency fluctuations. Australia, Sweden, Switzerland, they've already cut. The UK, European Union, they're going to be doing it in the coming months as well. So this is all good. But again, there's a fear of cutting rates too early and then waiting too long. They want to avoid a recession, of course, but we're getting to where we need to be. Rates are definitely under 7 again. First-time home buyer and some of those, those specialty programs, you're going to get rates that are low 6s, mid 6s. But overall, the 10-year note, which is really what's used to gauge where mortgage rates are, has been declining since October. October is when it's had its peak, really. So we're getting there. So just put on the seatbelts or keep your seatbelts on, and we'll get there.
All right. So thank you for the update. I want to get right into the heart of why we're here, and I also want to give you some context. There are some continuing meetings that are going on, and this is a very fluid situation, so things are not 100% carved in stone, but I owe it to you to give you the best vision as to what's going on so we can make the right decisions to take care of our clients. In its simplest form, the real estate transaction is now being governed by or being controlled by 3 contracts instead of 2. And we've been doing something for the same way for so long, it's hard to get our hands around it. Once we understand the foundation, I think the rest of the pieces will fall into place a little bit better. For years and years and years, the real estate transaction started with a listing agent and their brokerage signing an exclusive right to sell agreement and promoting that the property for sale. A buyer's agent would bring a buyer, and the buyer would submit a contract to the seller. That would be contract number 2. Okay. and there was an implied contract or offer of compensation from the listing broker to the buyer's agent. Okay, that wasn't a direct contract. We didn't sign a contract with each broker saying that you're going to pay us this amount. Now the transaction is being controlled by three. There's the listing agreement and the seller. There's the buyer agency agreement and the buyer, and then the contract between the buyer and the seller. And understanding this framework will make a lot of the other pieces a little bit more understandable and more logical. So that's, one of the fundamental changes that's going to trip us up until we divorce ourselves from the old standard. I have a document that I shared. I'm going to put it on the screen, and it's going to be a catalyst for our conversation here. Some of the questions that I've been hearing a lot is if we do our buyer's agency agreement and we sign that up at 2.5%, and we sign up at 2.5%, and then the listing agreement or the seller is offering 3%, is that allowed? For me, I thought, well, you can always renegotiate a contract, but this provision, you'll see it here twice. It says pursuant to the settlement agreement, we're not allowed to have variable terms. And under the mandatory provisions of the buyer agreement, one of them is clearly written that compensation may not exceeds the amount agreed to in the original agreement with the buyer. And it appears that if we do a contract at 2.5%, the seller is offering 3%, that would be a potential problem for us with the language of the NAR settlement, because they want the contract between the buyer and the buyer's agent or the buyer's broker to be the governing document and not to be influenced by what somebody else pays. I hope that's clear for everybody, and that's one of the cornerstones of the Department of Justice's concerns.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Okay, so we're getting a lot of questions about if you sign a buyer's agency agreement at 2.5%, the seller's offering 3%, can you then accept the 3%, or can you put on the agreement, my fee is 2.5%, or what the listing broker or the seller is willing to pay? That would not be allowable per the language of the NAR settlement and the spirit of the DOJ's objections. Does that make sense?
No, none of it.
No.
You can't get more. You can
But-
get less, but you can't get more.
But it does say, unless it's agreed in writing by the buyer and buyer's agent, the excess would be credited to the buyer. But if you make a provision in your buyer agency agreement that if the seller is offering additional compensation, that you would be able to accept that. The very first question, Rob, on the sheet, I think if you make a provision in that buyer agency agreement, that's what it sounds like to me, unless
Okay,
I'm
well,
reading it wrong.
here, let's look at this. I think this part here, the mandatory provision, this is from the NAR back page. Include a statement that the MLS participant may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with the buyer. So, and there was some place in these Q&As, and I watched the information that you provided me from the NAR attorney, and it was clear in a fax that you cannot accept more if the seller's agent or the seller is offering more than what's in your buyer agreement. What's unclear to me is if you have a buyer that is willing to rewrite the agreement, if that is acceptable. But I think the variable component of I'll take less or more if the listing agent only is offering 2%, I'll accept it. I think that is equally as egregious in the language from the Department of Justice and the research that I've done so far. In the essentials of a buyer's agency agreement, I
Exactly
think
what
it's over
they-
here.
Say, we're not supposed to be able to do. They're
I'm
price
sorry.
fixing.
Isn't NAR lawyers giving any information, like a rule for everybody?
Well, so what there is there's
And explain all the possible scenarios
workers'
in
compensation.
trying to guess.
You just can't get more than what you put on the buyer's broker's agreement. So if it's
Yes.
2.5, the seller's offering 3, you only get to 2.5. The buyer can accept the other 0.5% as a concession. But it has to be,
Theirs.
Ron, are you reading that from somewhere?
no, I went to a class yesterday, through the buyer's broker's agreements, modifications and all that stuff.
Right, so that's consistent with what you learned as of yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay, what I believe is you could rewrite an agreement if you had a buyer. Now, whether or not this practice comes under scrutiny, because it seems to be in conflict with the spirit of what they're looking to accomplish. Okay,
They just want to rape
Um,
us. That's what.
I'm sorry?
They want to rape us.
Let me take a step back and share with you my thoughts, and I want to take a step out from all the legal mumbo jumbo, right? An inherent inequity in the way the system was working, and I just had an instance where the listing agent, took more than double what they were offering. Let's say the listing agent took 4 and put out 2%.
Mhm.
And the buyer's agent was very upset because they feel like that was not fair. The listing agent took advantage. In this scenario here, the DOJ wants you as the buyer's agent to identify what you're going to do and set a fee for it, and have that not be dependent upon, what a seller is willing to offer to induce us to sell their house. This is really hard to get around, but does anybody feel that it was unfair when you got a 1.5 or 2% commission, the listing agent got a 3 or 4?
Yeah.
course.
Okay, so we all felt that was unfair, and we felt that the listing agent was negotiating our fee. Okay, and here's another inequity that the system included before is, have you ever done the process of maybe sharing the commission 50-50? You take a 5 or 6% listing, you put out half to the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent does nothing. Has anybody ever been in that situation?
Yes.
A lot.
Right? And are you able to then say, because you did nothing, I'm going to pay you less?
No, you can't do that.
You can't do that. So as much as I feel the frustration about how these rules are limiting our flexibility in one regard, it's giving us more flexibility if we're a good buyer's agent to control our commission and our fee, if that makes any sense. Okay. And then further down the road, there is the ability, and we're going to get into that, for you to negotiate the homeowner to pay a higher fee as part of the contract. And that's going to be one of the questions that's really critical. Okay. So change is never comfortable or easy. We always tend to look at the negative first, but there's 2 positives that are accomplished here. One is, we're not going to pay somebody when we list a property, theoretically 3%, if they're not providing the services and they didn't demonstrate that to their client. And number 2, if we're a full service buyer's rep, we now have the ability to earn a fee that represents the services that we deliver. Okay. And I want to acknowledge Adona's on here too. I didn't see if she's on with her phone. She's been very instrumental in helping us put this together. Adona, Elizabeth Fozzie, and Deborah Gimes, Fran Blakely. So we have a great team that have all stepped up to make a contribution here. Ron Piccolo sharing here. So,
Rob?
yes,
I have a question. So it's very crazy off question. So in the buyer broker agreement, does your commission have to be specific to a percentage? If you have conversations with your buyer and you inform them of, your compensation, can it be a range between 2 to 3%, or it has to be 2, 2.5, or 3?
so it has to be a defined amount. So it has to either be 2, 2.5, or 3, or you can say my fee is $10,000. You can do either of those two, but you can't do a floating. I imagine that you might be able to say, look, if I sell your house in the first week, it's 2%. If it's 1 to 4 weeks, it's 2.5. If it's over 4 weeks, it's 3%, because that's defined. I would think that would pass, but I don't think you can leave it open as 2 to 3, depending upon what the offer of compensation or offer of concession is.
Rob, we can
Okay.
also put that we can get up to 4%. Like we plan on actually having it that if the seller's contribution is 4%, that we can get that. And if a buyer asks, well, why would it be that amount? It happens all the time. We always see where there's a house that maybe needs more work. They're more motivated to try and get someone to buy. So there's going to be instances where people will still pay. And there's no reason why we can't get the higher percentage if it's offered. Obviously, your buyer can ask the question, and then that's just your value proposition. And if they don't have to pay for it, I don't see or think that they're going to have the issue. I mean, I really don't.
So Scott, I think the like if you'd have to put there, my fee is 4%. And then if you had a transaction and you're like, oh, we're trying to put this together, I'm going to lower my fee to make it work because I don't have enough money to close. I think that would be acceptable. I think having a prearranged plan, I'm going to take 4% or whatever the seller is accepting, is something that flies in direct conflict with what is looking to be accomplished by the buyer agency rules. Anyone on our leadership team have a quick comment on that?
Yeah, when you, if you put I would recommend, rather than putting a number in your buyer's broker agreement, is put a percentage. And I would probably put 3% on every buyer's broker's agreement. If there is a bonus to the buyer's broker from the seller, you use the compensation form along with the buyer's broker's agreement. Use a compensation form to get that bonus. That's how you have to do it. But I would put 3% on all the buyers. That's what I would recommend.
Right, but so if you have a 4%, then you'd have to go back to your client and say, we need to amend this.
You can do that.
Scott and Ron, I don't think it's completely clear, but it definitely flies in the face of what they're looking to accomplish. And I want to just keep moving on here. If we follow the, what do they call it? The provisions for a buyer's agency agreement. If there is a commission that pays 4 and we have 3, without any engineering, the additional 1% would go to the buyer. And that is another foundational principle that the DOJ is looking to accomplish, which is they're looking to uncouple. You remember hearing that term a lot in the beginning, uncouple the compensation, where listing agent, seller, buyer's agent, buyer have their own agreement and they're not contingent upon each other. They believe that there's a collusive nature if the commissions are coupled. So I don't want to go any further. I do think there will be cases where you can make adjustments, but I just want to make you aware. I think that's something that is probably going to be under the microscope, is what they're looking for.
I got a quick question.
Go ahead.
If you were to put something like 4% on this buyer agency agreement, I think you would get a lot of pushback. You'd have a hard time, I think, getting a buyer to sign it, because if you end up with a property where they're only offering 1 and 1.5%, your buyer is going to be on the hook for 2 to 2.5%.
Correct. So Jeff, these are the things that the DOJ inherently wants to have a negotiation between the buyer and the buyer's agent exclusive of what the seller is offering as a blanket offer of compensation. And you're right, there are challenges to both ends. I mean, property that requires more effort to sell might have a higher compensation offering. And if you say, I'm going to take 2.5 or 3 and they offer 4, you might be leaving money on the table and doing extra work. But my job is to educate you and give you the information and give you a little bit of a lens as to why things are being done the way they are done from the people who are pushing the implementation of this. Okay.
And one more question.
Go ahead.
On the class I was in yesterday, what I was getting out of this is that a buyer's agent can't receive anything more than what's on that form from any source. However, and I think I know the answer to this, but this would not preclude you, if you were the listing agent, from getting the seller side too, right?
Correct. I believe that those two are 2 separate compensation agreements.
I thought so too, but I just want to make sure that that language didn't preclude you from getting 2 ends of it.
Yep. So no, this does not. Anything that would interfere with that would be state law, Jeff. Can an attorney review? This is a New Jersey question, but can an attorney, while the contract is being negotiated, take out the buyer's agent compensation? And the answer is they can affect the terms of the transaction, but if they know the buyer is obligated to pay a certain fee, they would not be, transacting in the best interest of their client. Previously, in the way that business is conducted in New Jersey, is if an agent put in there that, hey, you're offering 2%, I want 3, they put that into the contract. That contract is between the buyer and the seller. Okay, the buyer and the seller can say, well, we don't want to pay out that extra 1%, and the buyer's agent is left without recourse. Here, with the buyer's agent compensation governed by a separate contract, it would be against the client's interest, and thus attorneys should not amend that to the detriment of their client. Does that make sense for the New Jersey team? I don't want to go too deep in that. Okay. Written
Can I
buyer.
ask you something?
I'm sorry?
I need to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
If the seller agreed to pay 6%, 3 for the listing and 3 for the buyer, like used to be, and you have the buyer's agreement saying that you're gonna gain, the buyer's gonna pay you 3%. That agreement gets null, or what happens there?
That agreement gets what?
It gets with no effect because you're getting paid by the seller.
So the effect of that agreement would be that you are no longer going to see the compensation on the MLS systems. You're going to have to find from the listing agent directly what that offer of compensation is. So there is a small nuance in how that's being managed. And that brings up another great question, which is, are existing listing agreements going to need to be rewritten?
I asked the question because of that. I have a listing and I'm offering 3% to the buyer's agent.
Right, and the new laws that are going into effect and settlement provisions, they don't prevent the seller from offering compensation to a buyer's agent or a buyer. But what they do is they prohibit it from being syndicated in the form it is right now. So it can't be in showing time. It can't be in the MLS. It can't appear on realtor.com. I don't believe it can, I'm almost certain it can't appear on Zillow. So therefore, the way that we communicate it has changed epically. But Fran, it's your understanding that New Jersey, that the existing, the listing agreements in effect before the effective date do not need to be amended, correct?
Correct.
And
That's what I was told.
and,
As far as the New Jersey MLS goes,
right.
we
I
don't have
missed
to
that.
go and
And-
redo all the agreements. We are having a new agreement made, which is not gonna show any compensation on it, even on the form, other than the listing agent's compensation. And then, it's not gonna be displayed, but right now, you don't have to redo what you have already. But you will have to answer phone calls saying what the compensation is, so that, the buyer's agent will know.
All the
And-
fields on the MLS are gonna go away. So when the 17th comes around, if even though the seller is offering 3% to the buyer's agent or the real estate company is, that's all gonna be gone. So you're right. The only way you're gonna find out is to make the phone call to the listing agent.
I highly recommend doing it in a text so that you have it in writing.
Right.
Email.
Now I'm gonna ask, if Deborah, Colleen, Elizabeth, Ron, in Florida, do we anticipate any of these agreements have to be rewritten? I'm guessing based on the national. No.
No, they do not. They'll,
And,
what's going to happen is it's automatically going to remove the compensation from the MLS.
That's all.
Yeah, your
So-
agreement can stay
And
in
we are,
place.
and we are getting, new listing agreements as well.
Yeah,
How is this gonna
But as far-
automatically?
Sorry. Also, as far as the, getting the proof of the compensation from the selling broker, there is a form for that. We do have one in Florida.
compensation form.
Right.
Yes.
So, let me just see,
Who had a question?
I did. I'm trying to keep up with what's going on here. Are we saying that our current active listings do not have to be changed?
Correct.
And that they will automatically, somehow they're gonna be automatically scrubbed of any compensation that's on them now?
On the
Yeah.
MLS.
On
yeah.
the MLS.
Everything's gonna be
question.
gone. Those fields are all gonna be gone. So
Hold on, so timeout, that's for Beaches MLS.
Okay,
Yes.
so to make sure I understand this, my current active listings on Beaches, I do not have to change that. Beaches MLS has got to automatically scrub all the compensation from my MLS.
Correct.
I have a quick question. If we have an existing listing agreement with our sellers and they say, well, now we don't have to pay the buyer's agent, I want to change my contract, can that happen or not?
so if the seller says, I don't want to compensate a buyer anymore, is that the question? A buyer's agent?
Yes, Rob, yes, that's the question. But we have an agreement with them for, let's say, 6 months or a year. What do we do then?
I buy the contract.
You have to go by the agreement, it's already signed.
So we can't change it. Okay, good,
Buy the contract.
great, okay. Thank you.
Hi, it's Cindy in Bureau. I took a listing this week and I had the seller sign the compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker, which offers their compensation. I would imagine that when I have a showing request, I would send that to the showing agent and to be executed with a contract.
You have an addendum of the offer of compensation, is that what you're saying?
Yes, I had them sign the compensation agreement, seller to buyer's broker.
Okay, and
To be executed by the buying broker, pending a contract.
and that, is that a new form that's recently come
Yes.
out?
Yes,
Okay, so that would be similar to, I think, Fran, the listing addendum, right? Yes. Okay. Yeah, so the answer to that would be yes. And for Lisa, who said, hey, my client may want to not offer compensation to the buyer. Yes, you have a written agreement, but I think, you know, a seller can say, hey, I'm not willing to accept that offer. You know what I mean? Like, so you have to balance business judgment and contracts. Okay, that's my 2 cents on that, and I wouldn't just say, hey, you have a contract and ignore the rest.
Hey, Rob, Eric Pruitt. Can you hear
Yes,
me?
sir.
Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yep.
Can you advertise it on your website, the compensation, or on showing time?
No, in showing time, no.
No.
Do it on showing time. On your website you can, but you can't put it on MLS. Like, you know, go to my website for more information. That's illegal.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Oh my God.
Ron, repeat that.
Yeah, you can't, you can put your listing on your website and say that you're paying a percentage to the buyer's broker, but you can't put anything in the MLS
Remarks or broker
states-
remarks, yeah.
stating that, you know, go to my website for more information or anything like that.
Right, but we're gonna get into this, so you can't go to my website, but on your website, you can post for only your personal listings, not even your brokerage
Correct.
listings.
No, that's incorrect, Rob. I'm sorry to interrupt. Under broker remarks, you can put your website information. And you are allowed to say, for more information, visit my website. You are allowed to say that because I had the meetings with the attorneys for the Miami board, and that's one of the things that I sent over to you, Rob, I think it was like a month ago, and you are allowed to say that. You are allowed to put your website information under broker remarks, not under regular remarks, under broker remarks.
No, that's not what we learned yesterday.
Yeah, that's not what we heard in New Jersey either.
Rob, this is
They
Deb.
said
Rob, this is Deb.
you can
Yes,
put your
Deb.
website on there, but you can't
Wait,
put
wait.
One
Can
at
we
a time.
let Debbie speak?
Yeah, one at a time, please.
So just to go back to that, none of these listings are our personal listings. They're all our brokers' listings. So we have to keep that in mind. We don't have personal listings. But I think we need clarification. My understanding, this is just for the MLS. We need to clarification. I hear that in Florida, you guys have an addendum that states that the seller is offering compensation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And
Yes.
are we gonna have that in New Jersey, Rob? Because it's not,
We do-
my understanding is there's nothing illegal about us having the seller sign something if they're offering compensation. We just can't put it on the MLS. So
going-
there's a lot
Yeah.
of talking going back and forth, but I think we need to clarify that.
It is
So-
going to be the real estate commission addendum that currently exists, will still exist right now. They may modify that now with the New Jersey changes that were made and the law being passed. But we do the real estate, well, as far as the New Jersey MLS goes, we use the real estate addendum. You know, the commission split addendum, I'm sorry.
compensation form.
Yeah.
Right, so just, I know you guys all understand this, but you're hearing a lot of comments going on. The sellers can sign something that says they're offering compensation. I just want to clarify that because people are not understanding that.
Yes.
So, and ironically, Deb, here's where things kind of get a little bit hairy, and I'm trying to find where I read it because I've done a tremendous amount of research. But there is in a NAR rule that only the agent can post on their website, their own listings compensation. They can't do the entire brokerages, even though the listing belongs to the broker, which makes no sense.
Makes no sense, right?
But I have read that in 2 separate spots. So for example, like a big company like EXP, where there's one entity across 50 states, they would be able to post all their compensation there. And if there was a franchise company like Remax, we would only be able to do, you know, our company's listings. So they're saying that the listings can only be, the offer of compensation can only be posted on the agent's individual website for their own listings.
Right.
And I've seen that in a couple of places. And Ron, you're going to back me up on it. I'm not saying it's not subject to change, but I have read that clearly delineated in multiple spots.
It's
And,
crazy, right? Makes no sense.
Hey,
Well,
Rob,
The whole thing
so-
doesn't
so-
make sense.
so
the
Deb-
thought
so-
process is that it's not setting commissions.
So Deb, what they're trying to do is they're trying to not make it easy to compare what commissions offered on each property, in my opinion, for whatever reason. So that's my belief. In New Jersey, there's a meeting on Thursday, a live meeting with the executive team for New Jersey Association of Realtors, their legal counsel. In Edison, we have some of our leadership team attending live and some attending virtually. We'll have some more guidelines on what apply nationally after that, and New Jersey specifically. And the two states, just by way of observation, are behaving very differently, in my opinion. I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I have copies of the buyer agency agreements, and the New Jersey one changed in a significant and substantial way, and the Florida one, Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that with me. But I looked through the entire Florida agreement, and there's like 3 minor changes that you would need a microscope to discover. Basically, the first page, exactly the same. You have to go until paragraph 9, where early termination now becomes conditional termination. I mean, and then there's a minor change in how that gets handled. And then there's no changes until paragraph 13, which was special clauses. Now it's called other terms. That's how much they changed it. And then number 14, which is the acknowledgement, has the biggest change, which just says electronic signatures. This is the only change in that provision. This is the only substantial change outside of wording, is electronic signatures will be acceptable and binding. And then underline, brokerage commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. Broker may not receive compensation from any other source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to with consumer. However, consumer agrees that broker may receive separate compensation from owner of the property for services rendered by to owner by broker for which consumer will not be responsible. That's the only difference to the Florida one. The New Jersey one is basically they took a chainsaw to it and redid it. So I just wanted to, let you know that, our local or our state leadership is taking different steps in addressing this. I do believe that the New Jersey one, either from our own brokerage or from the state leadership, will have a simplified document, maybe a 1-page for like a single property or a 2-day contract, so that you kind of get to know us, and then you might enter into another agreement. So this is going to need to mature, and it's going to be delineated by standards of practice, because nobody knows exactly how this is going to play out. Okay. To me, it makes sense that maybe there's an industry site where people can get the commissions that are being offered, or concessions being offered by sellers to buyers, because by way of hand, don't all talk, but have you ever tried to reach one of your colleagues and they're hard to reach? And how does that look upon ourselves as a reflection when somebody's trying to make decisions, right? So if somebody's got an agreement to pay us 3%, or maybe I should start saying this, Fran, 3 bananas, and we don't know what's being offered by the seller when we prepare the offer, it can create some really big frustration points. Karen,
Rob, they mentioned yesterday also that you can put your compensation on your real estate sign out front of the house on a rider. You can put 3% to buyer's broker on your yard sign, which I think is bonkers.
So Ron, that might be a new standard that gets adopted. I'm not sure, because that would certainly have more transparency and clarity, right?
Yeah.
So I want to continue going through. Karen, you had a question?
I just wanted to say one thing, Rob, that I think everybody should really keep in mind. I think the big word is adaptable, because I don't think we're finished with all the changes. And as much, we're going to do everything we can as a leadership team to try to get the information out there as things change. But no point in being upset about it. Just having your mindset that we're going to be adaptable to what comes down the pike, because we don't really have a choice. And we are leaders, so we should all be able to do this.
And Fran, I want to further what you're saying is I think the people who are making the rules don't understand how the rules are intended to be implemented, and it's a very fluid situation. And even if it was settled, there would still be interpretations, right?
Right.
Because the reason why there are so many attorneys is because you could read a paragraph 9 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody at some point is going to make a determination that I read it this way and this is the standard. And that may even be different state by state. Okay. And states are, New Jersey had a major overhaul of its legislative process with the New Jersey Real Estate Commission. And they've clarified things, which I actually think is good, because at least it gives us some direction. And I'm going to share with the group, not to confuse Florida, but I just want you to see how things are progressing. Okay. So Karen, you had a question before we go on, and then I'm going to go back to my document.
I was just going to say, Fran covered it. You just said it. I just wanted to say we're still going to need a lot of patience, because this still seems to be a very fluid, undefined, still needs to be set in stone process. So that was just my thought.
Thank you for sharing. So we talked about where can we post offers of compensation, unrepresented buyers. There still needs to be some more clarity on that when you take listings. If somebody's going to come in and say, I want to be a for buy by owner, like we all know a FSBO, right? For sale by owner, they're going to be people who decline representation. And as a seller's agent, listing agent, you're going to have to take on more responsibility with an unrepresented buyer, and there probably needs to be provisions put in there. Not a whole lot of thought has been given to that. We talked about active listings. I have these, everybody has a link to this document, and you should be able to go on here and access everything I'm showing here. These settlement documents here is probably not the right title for it, but I have the new Florida Buyers Agency Agreement. I have an open house disclosure. I have a New Jersey Buyer Agency Agreement and the New Jersey Commission Split Addendum. And there's one more document. There's one more document I'm gonna put, but this here is what I recommend putting on the door of your open house right now to be compliant, which basically says that you represent the seller. Here is a preliminary open house that should be called a sign-in. Basically, explains the necessary language. Thank you to Fran Blakely for putting this together and saying that the buyer has acknowledged that they know that you represent the interest of the seller.
Hey, Rob, can I ask a question on the notification that you just showed for the open houses?
Yes.
So on that form, that form reads like it's for the listing agent hosting their open house. All of my agents host my open houses, so the wording doesn't really effectively apply to them, right?
It does apply to them, because you are a fiduciary to Rob. Rob is broker record of every company. So even if someone from Franklin Lakes was hosting your open house, it still applies. We represent the seller. When you sign that agreement with the seller, the fiduciary is really between Rob and the seller. So anybody that works in Rob's office, that he's the broker of record, is the fiduciary of the seller.
Okay, so then if they are the buyer's agent, is there an additional disclosure that they're trying to obtain that buyer as a client, or does this suffice for everything?
It says down here that if you, as the buyer, are not ready or exclusively represented by a buyer's agent, please be advised that the open house is not precluded. You know, they can pick up the buyer and represent them also. Disclosed dual agency is still allowed in New Jersey. If they're not comfortable with that, the broker of the office or manager can assign a designated agency. But disclosed dual agency is still allowed, but you can only be paid by one party in disclosed dual agency within the company. So if we're representing both, you have to be paid by one party. So it's important when you're taking your listings to get the seller to agree to disclose dual agency so that, you know, so that they know that if you're representing someone and taking it a step further than usual with that document is, if I'm representing someone, the commission must solely be paid by you as the seller or solely be paid for everything by the buyer, which that's not going to happen at this point.
Okay, and then my follow-up question is just, so when that person comes into the home, they're unrepresented and you are now looking to represent them, is there any kind of agreement necessary for that interaction? Kind of like the touring agreements that Zillow's throwing around, or what?
Touring agreement is not, in my mind, but I'm gonna ask next week in New Jersey, is not a legal buyer's representation agreement, according to, you know, what is required. So I would say that they can tour the home, and I'll ask next week, Glenn, when I'm in Edison, but they can tour the home, but you do have to get them to execute a buyer's agreement so they know, see what the buyer's agreement and what buyer representation means before you're writing an offer. So it could be happen as a really quick process. I mean, I don't think that you can jump on them to sign it when they walk through the door, but I think, you know, you got to rapport builds very quickly with those people coming into open houses. And I think you're going to have to execute an agreement before you move forward with an offer if they're interested.
So
I will verify that though in
All right, thank you.
Edison next week.
Yeah, thank you.
And the compensation by two parties for one broker representing, I believe, is only a New Jersey unique challenge, and that may be, in my opinion, addressed legislatively at some point.
Yeah, they're
Because
working on it.
I don't think it makes any sense the way it's written. Where I'm going to give Jersey a little bit of credit, and whether you like what the decision is or you don't like what the decision is, at least we have clarity as to where our leadership's at and where the legislative body is going. And I'm going to go back to the document real quick. And for us and our team in Florida, you know, this is just giving you some insight. So our governor in New Jersey said it's August 1st, which is 16 days or 17 days before the NAR. There are 6 major changes. They're compelling a fully completed property condition disclosure form before a buyer signs a contract. Listing agents will be required to explicitly disclose who they represent at an open house. That's that disclosure. Designated agency, which enables a broker to appoint an agent to either side of a transaction at the client's request, is now permitted. All licensees will be required to use brokerage agreements which outline the services they will provide when representing a buyer. Sellers can no longer disclose compensation MLS systems. That's already, you know, in the NAR settlement, and continuing education classes at agency are now required for licensing law. So a lot of times states, you know, mimic other states. So that may give our Florida team some insight as to what may be brewing in the Florida legislation. I doubt the outcomes will be the same, but I think they're going to desire to give us clarity so that we can comply with the rules and regulations. Secondly, so they comply with rules and regs. I just lost my train of thought.
I
But
have one
anyway.
question until you get your thought back, Rob. This is Karma.
Yep.
So
Karma, we lost you.
in the listing agreement, can you
So that's my
say
number.
if the buyer,
And
Hold
You
on.
can, I
Karma,
need
Karma, I'm
IDs
gonna
for
mute,
all four.
Karma, I muted everybody. Can you unmute yourself, please? There's too much background noise. Thank you.
Okay, this is Karma from New Jersey. Now, if in the listing agreement, can you say if the buyer is coming through you from an open house or from whatever? So if the buyer is coming from an open house, because you have to serve both people, the buyer and the seller. In this case, let's say the commission 3%, but if the buyer is coming from your side, it will be 4%, but the buyer is coming from other broker will be 3%. There is no commission for the buyer. But I said, if the buyer, I'm the listing agent, if the buyer came through the open house, and that buyer, I have to serve 2 clients. In the meantime, in that case, I have to do an extra work. The commission are not going to be 3%, are going to be 4%. But if
Right.
that buyer coming from another agency will be 3%, can we do that?
So my opinion, and I'll welcome some feedback from our leadership on the call, is you would have to do a buyer's agency agreement, and that buyer's agency agreement would probably say, if you buy this house, you owe a fee of 1%. And if I take you out and you buy something else, it would be whatever you negotiate, 2 or 3% in that scenario. And I think that would be adequate as long as it's clearly delineated and has clarity. And I do remember what my other thought was, but I want to get from our leadership team. Do you concur with that?
Yes,
But you cannot, I'm sorry,
I
Rob,
think
you
she's
cannot collect it from 2 people, only
I-
from the seller.
I think she's talking about more on the listing agreement.
Yes.
So you go in and you take a listing and you're gonna now say, my compensation is gonna be 4% for listing this house. But if I have to represent the buyer also, then I want 6%, because there's an opportunity. You want me to do open houses. There's an opportunity. I'm gonna likely maybe have the buyer for this property. And I'm not sure when I meet these buyers if they're going to be able to pay the compensation. But every listing agreement, depending on the multiple listing system, is going to be different. And I believe that you're more in Western New Jersey. I don't know, but
she's in Princeton.
Yeah.
We're quickly running out of time, but I want to kind of button this up, and here's where another issue could happen in New Jersey, where which is even more likely than that, is Fran has a buyer's agency agreement, and then she goes and shows your house, Karma, and you're they want to make an offer. Only one party can pay on a disclosed dual agency scenario. So what would happen is, Fran would have to go and say, the seller needs to pay my commission as part of that transaction to be compliant with New Jersey law. And that's one of the peculiar things to the New Jersey rules and regs. And they're clear to be in Virginia, Florida, and New York, some legislative workouts that need to be completed. And I just want to give an example, which was what was on my head. I just couldn't put it together. Is in New York, which, Fran, you have a lot of agents that are dual licensed, New Jersey and New York, out of your office. I believe New York still offers the ability for a seller to pay $500 and not do a seller's disclosure, correct?
I'm not licensed in New York. Maybe Adona can answer that.
Or Fran or Adona.
Hi, I'm here. So yes, as of right now, that has not changed. So if a seller does
No,
not fill out a
actually,
sell,
it did.
it did change. Okay, so
Yeah, you have to have it completed. But although, even though you have to have it completed, there is a section where it does say that if the seller refuses, they could still pay 500. But I think they have mandated that it needs to be filled out.
It seems to conflict, but I mean, like, unless there's been recent legislative changes, like New York, says that you're supposed to fill out a disclosure, but if you don't, you could pay, like a parking ticket. You give $500 to the buyer, and you're forgiven that obligation. And
Yeah, but they changed that recently.
Okay, so yeah, but if we can get that, like, for our New York team, that'd be great. But that just shows you different philosophies. Like you cross the border, if you're licensed in 2 states, you have to be very careful with these changes coming out. And that's just one of the things I wanted to highlight. So Donna, we're doing a 10 o'clock Wednesday next week meeting for the New Jersey team on some of the unique items in New Jersey. And tentatively, there are some meetings in Florida. There are some meetings in Florida for our leadership team to attend. So I believe it's going to be Thursday at 10 o'clock for our Florida team for the unique stuff to the Florida changes. So
Hey, Rob, I just want to clarify, our New Jersey Mastermind is actually on Tuesdays 10 to 11, and I did send out a calendar to our leadership as well as some of my offices. So I'll just ask our leadership to email the calendar to their agents, but it's Tuesdays 10 to 11.
So Tuesdays 10 to 11 for New Jersey, and it looks like it's going to be Thursday 10 to 11 for Florida. We will have the Friday Mastermind. I believe we're going to pick up from where we left off here with any updates, address any questions. And in closing, I want to tell you all something that I really feel passionate about, which is, this fork in the road is a tremendous opportunity for us to get paid and demonstrate what we do and what we're worth. Okay, and it's going to be uncomfortable because we've not been doing it, but now we can identify, hey, here's what I'm going to do for you as your buyer's agent. Reevaluate what additional enhancements you can do. And I would suggest everybody who's comfortable, and when you get a listing of a motivated seller, you're like 99.9% I'm getting that and I'm going to sell it. I know so many of you have that skill set. We need to take that same confidence and we need to reinvent the buyer consultation, the buyer value proposition, and say, now I'm going to be able to get what I'm worth. Okay, I'm going to be able to demonstrate my value. And things that you might be paying attention to is, hey, what's my, when I work with a buyer, what percentage of those buyers actually move into a house in 90 days? Keep track of that. And say, hey, the industry, 40% of the buyers buy within 6 months. 92% of my buyers are under contract in 90 days or less. So if we decide to work together, we're talking about the results I can deliver. How can I deliver that? I educate you on each unique market and give you the tools and resources to be a successful buyer. These are just some things that are in my head, and I know everybody's worried about the change. But this here is an opportunity for us to define our unique value proposition, to earn what we're worth, and not to be afraid. Okay, you're here.
Sorry, can I say something very quick?
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
My daughter, she sent me a text message. She said, "Mommy, you have to be every day. Have to say 3 things you are grateful, and one of the things that I'm grateful that you're the leader for UMAX." Thank you.
You're too kind, Karma. Thank you for that comment. You make me blush. But I'm a servant. I breathe ways to try to figure out how I can, make your job easier to deliver an unparalleled service to your clients. And if we keep that in mind, we're always going to be in abundance. And people are always going to need representation to buy houses, and who better to serve them than the talented, experienced group of people that we have on this call. So I appreciate you all. New Jersey, what do you say? It's Tuesday, Adona, at 10, and Florida, keep an eye open. It'll probably be Thursday at 10. And I'm also grateful to our leadership team for all their contribution. We spent a couple hours anticipating questions and going through those in advance. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank
Bye.
you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Have a lovely
Bye,
weekend.
everybody.
Thank you, Rob. Bye-bye.